In this video, we're going to be looking at what a risk assessment is and how to perform one. Hey everybody, welcome to StudioSec. Thank you so much for watching. Like this video if it's helpful, comment down below with a cool risk assessment story you might have, and subscribe for more content. Now on this channel, we've talked a little bit about what risk is and how important it is to mitigate it. You see, ultimately in infosec, risk is kind of the name of the game. We're all looking at ways to mitigate risk in one form or another, but that all stems from one thing, and that will be your risk assessment. The risk assessment ultimately births the cybersecurity plan. You can't really create an informed cybersecurity plan if you don't have a risk assessment. So we're going to talk about what that is today. You see, risk assessments is really what you can imagine it is. It's an assessment of risk, but more specifically, it is an analysis on the people, the processes, and the technologies that an organization or a business uses day to day, month to month, quarter to quarter, and what risks or what vulnerabilities might arise from those things. Now, one thing to note, it is impossible to have a riskless profile. If you have a computer, the only real way to have zero risk is to unplug it, put it underground, never touch it again. I just created a riskless strategy for you. Obviously, everybody's gonna have some level of risk, especially if you are a business or an organization. You're gonna have probably more risks than an individual. And the reason is, especially if you hire people, you're bringing people in. If you are dealing with clients, you have some kind of an information exchange. If you have third parties, there's that risk as well. There's all kinds of risk, but you have to be able to find a way to quantify and present those risks and create a plan. Now, there are three ways to classify risk. There's risk tolerance, risk avoidance, and risk mitigation. Risk tolerance is effectively just saying that you accept the risk, you tolerate the risk, you will just take whatever comes at you. Maybe you get some kind of an insurance and you just say, you know what, we have to have this function, and so we will accept whatever risks come with it. Risk avoidance is the exact opposite of that. It means you want nothing to do with those risks. The risks are too intolerable. You will avoid the function. You're just going to avoid the risk. And then of course there's risk mitigation, which is a combination of the two, which is you need the function, but you also can kind of strip away some functions, or at the very least enact some policies that can mitigate risk. Now, how to perform a risk assessment? What do we do here? As I said before, we're going to be looking at people, processes, and technologies. If you've worked with any kind of leader in business, you've probably heard those things said before, because that's what they're looking at. They're looking at people, processes, and technologies. So that's exactly what you should look at. But more specifically, you should look at the life cycle of information in an organization, from initial creation to the information being stored and left to the sands of time. You want to know exactly everywhere information flows, who touches it, who handles it, who stores it, who executes it. All this information is going to be super important for you to know in developing a risk strategy. So how can we identify that with people? Well, what people interact with a particular piece of information? How do people share information in an organization? For instance, are people sharing sensitive information over email or over some kind of an internal IM? Or are they sharing it over an encrypted messaging app? For processes, and this is going to vary, of course, by what kind of third parties are out there, as well as your business needs. But for processes, you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at, from creation to long-term storage, where information flows. What process is this information tied to? What kind of compliance is this information ultimately falling under? We've already talked about who specifically handles this information, but does this information interact with any other processes or tie into other pieces of information from another process? What do those processes like? Does information ever leave an organization? For instance, does a third party store that information? And of course that leads to technologies. Is what technologies does that information move through? Is it over a specific email? Is it over through a specific web application? Is it stored in a particular kind of database? How is it stored? How is it shared? Is it encrypted? That will be your technology portion. A big piece will be data classification. If data is not classified by certain tiers, you might run into some extra issues because data classifications can really help differentiate between just like a normal like, hey, what's up note, right? Like written down on a piece of paper, and credit card information. Clearly you don't want to handle those two things the exact same way. And so classifying certain data within an organization will really help with this. Now back to the technologies part, you want to look at also if any part of the network or any internal infrastructure is connected to the internet, or if it's behind a firewall and a VPN. You'd be surprised with the number of organizations that have internet-facing internal applications. And it's not by choice. It might be some kind of an innocent misconfiguration, but those tiny little misconfigurations have huge impacts. And that is something you're going to want to look into. Now, when you're performing your risk assessment, you're going to want to take your time because obviously there's a lot of information you're going to be covering, and you want to make sure that you're covering it thoroughly with a detailed report, because this information is very important. You'll be presenting it to the leadership of your organization, but they'll be creating a cybersecurity plan from it and ultimately determining the future of your company in that way. So you want to make sure that you're giving them accurate, detailed, and well thought out information, so that way they're not making poorly informed plans. And of course, you're going to want to perform periodic risk assessments. You could do this annually, you could do this biannually, you could do this every 5 years. Another thing you could do is do rolling risk assessments. So let's say every 5 years you perform a full risk assessment, or maybe every year and every year in between you perform a risk assessment just for a particular department in your organization. And the reason you'd want to kind of spread that out a little bit is because it'll take time. You'll want to continue to audit to see where you've improved and where you might have fallen off the wayside. And you're going to want to make sure that you're constantly keeping a thumb on the pulse on where risk is in your organization. So with that, like this video if it was helpful, comment down below if you have any risk assessment experience, and subscribe for more content I'm posting every week. Thank you guys.